This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi Sai. Hope everyone had a easy tainus. Now we begin the 3 weeks and the grand finale for now of this topic of Techeles. By the way, until next year. The truth is there is a part 6. But this is the Halachik conclusion. And just by way of introduction, don't think that this came haphazardly or very superficially. I spent a lot of time going through many sources, speaking to many poskim, doing a lot of research. In fact, last time I gave this series, I got a call from the Techeles Institute, and they asked for permission to play these shiurim in the museum, although they completely disagreed with all of my conclusions. But they did appreciate the research and the presentation. And as we're going to see, we asked Siyata Deshmaila Asuke, Shmaitza, Aliba, Dehilchasa, because when it comes to any subjects, they always have to be presented and looked into in accordance with the halachic process. Meaning there is a halachic process and there's a scientific process. And they're not the same process. And as any subject in halacha, there is a process. The process is, you have to be able to trace it back to the Gemara, to the Rishonim, and to the Poskim, regardless of the definitions or identifications of naturalists or scientists, although we always take into account the reality of information that we have, and we use everything at our disposal, but there is a very specific process that has to be used. So, we're trying to present this without any agenda. We have no motives. This is not a political subject. This is a halachic subject, and it should be treated with the sanctity and the reverence of any halachic subject. Okay, so the Gemara says in Masechta Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadi Aleph Amud Aleph, Amar Leha Humino Rav Ami. A certain Apikar said to Rav Ami, Amritu Deshichvi Chaye. You say the dead are going to live again, right? You believe in Tchias HaMesim. V'hava Afra, but they're dust. V'Afra Mika Chaye, dust can't live. So he said, not true. Let me give you a parable what this is similar to. L'melech basar v'dam. To a king of flesh and blood, Sha'amar la'avadav, he said to his servants, L'chu banu li palterin gedolim, go build for me a great palace, b'makom she'ein mayim va'afar, where there's no water and dirt. So they went, and they built it, and they fell down. Amar lahem, so the king said, Chazru banu isa b'makom she'esh afar mayim, go build it where there is dirt and water. Amru lo, we can't do it. The king said, what do you mean you can't do it? If you were able to do it where there's no materials, then certainly you could do it where there is materials. So, therefore, the Rabbi Ami said back to the men, so too, if you don't think the Rebbe Shem could create life out of something that never lived, he certainly could create life out of something that did live. Meaning, if Hashem was able to bring life in the first place, he certainly could be Mechaye Mesim. And then he says, and if you don't believe me, go out to the valley and you'll see a rodent that's half flesh, half earth. Tomorrow, the earth half of the rodent will metamorphosize and transform and become completely rodent. Shema toimar lizman meruba, lest you say it takes a long time. Go up to the mountain and you'll see today there's only one chilazayin, and the rain will fall, and the next day the entire mountain will be full of chil zaynais. Chil zaynais. So the Yad Ramah on this Gemara says, what in the world is going on over here? The mountain will be full of chil zaynais. How in the world will a chilazayn get up to the top of the mountain? How is a chilazayn going to get to the top of the mountain? By the way, the Yad Ramah's opinion is that a chilazayn is a toila, a worm. But the Yad Ramah concludes with a very important idea when it comes to the subject of Techeles, and that is Mistavra dahai chilazon dahacha lav heich damin gabe Techelesu. Not all chil zoynos are created equal. Not every time it says the word chilazon in the Gemara doesn't mean the same creature. Elamina achrina demivrei me'afra. So this is a very important idea, and that is just because a Gemara uses the word chilazon, it doesn't necessarily refer to the chilazon from which we make Techeles. Not every Gemara in Shas that uses that terminology doesn't mean the same thing. There may be more than one chilazon found in Shas, although there's only one chilazon that produces Techeles. Okay. Rabbi Sai, let's approach this from a halachic perspective. If you want to identify something in halacha, the approach is you go to the Rishonim and you see how do the Rishonim identify what is the chilazon. So the first thing is, let's look in the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Tzitzis, Parak Beis, Halacha Beis, says the Rambam, how do you dye the Techeles of Tzitzis? You take wool and you soak it in lime, and then you wash it until it's clean, and you boil it with different chemicals so that it absorbs the color. And then you bring the blood of the chilazon, says the Rambam, Vehu Dug. What is a chilazon? A fish. What is a chilazon? A fish. Now that off the bat is a very big problem. If you remember from last week, I have it in my car. We had a picture of the chilazon, which according to Radzina Rebbe was a cuttlefish, which was a squid. Is a squid a fish? No. Then according to the latest discovery, which was originally discovered by none other than Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, which I could not believe it, I was totally shocked. Today is the yahrzeit of Rabbi Herzog. So it's really apropos that we discuss the halacha l'maisa on his yahrzeit. After all, this Murex trunculus, which is right now the best case scenario for Techeles, was the discovery of Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, which he dismissed. So what better could we do on his yahrzeit than defend his dismissal of the Murex trunculus as the chilazon? So the Rambam says it's it's a dug, it's a fish. It's a fish. Now, is the Murex trunculus a fish? It is not a fish. It's a snail. It's a snail. A snail is not a fish. It has a shell. It has. Imagine if you went to the store and you asked for a fish, and they gave you a snail. It ain't going to go over. Only in Navardik you could do something like that. You know, in Navardik you go to a fish store and you ask for nails, right? But if in a regular store, if you ask for a fish, if they give you a snail, you know, they would be shut down by the FDA. This is not a fish. And the Rambam says it's a dug, it's a fish. Who else says it's a dug? Look at number 4. Be'ein loymar dedavka chilazon shehu dug. Don't say it is a chilazon. It's not davka chilazon, which is a dug. So Tosfos also says it's a dug. The Rambam says it's a dug. The Tosfos says it's a dug. How in the world could you say the Murex trunculus is the chilazon when Roiv Rishonim say it's a fish? When Roiv Rishonim say it's a fish. So you'll say, well, wait a second, not everybody says it's a fish. Because the Gemara in Menachos continues, the Gemara in Menachos says that it's oila every 70 years. So Rashi in Menachos says, va'oila min ha'aretz. It comes out of the earth. No fish comes out of the earth. And in fact, Rashi in Sanhedrin says, what's a chilazon? A toilas, a worm. Now I ask you, is the Murex trunculus a worm? It's not a worm, it's a snail. But at least a worm is closer to a snail than a fish is to a snail. So if you want to make the case that the Murex trunculus is actually the chilazon, you're going to have to say it's not like the Rambam. It's not like Tosfos. It's like Rashi, and you're going to stuff it into Rashi. Rashi says it's a worm, and this is a snail. We're going to stuff it into Rashi. I mean, that's a pretty big doichek. Rashi says, first of all, by the way, when do we ever paskin like Rashi? We have a Rambam, we have Tosfos. Rashi, we will sometimes paskin like, but Rashi did not write his commentary on Shas lehalacha. Rashi wrote it as a peirush. Rashi is not the preeminent poisek. Rashi is a preeminent mefaresh. It would be very difficult to make the case that we're not going to go like the Rambam. We're not going to go like Tosfos. If you're a Sfardi, raise your hand if you're a Sfardi. Come on, it's Queens. Raise your hand if you're a Sfardi, right? No? No, it's not true. Only 2 people are willing to admit. Even I have some Sfardi, going back. Yeah, so if you're Sfardi, you follow the Rambam, and if you're Ashkenazi, you follow Tosfos. Who follows Rashi? So I know what you're thinking. The Gra, the famous Gra on Kalim. I know what you're thinking. The famous Gra on Kalim says that Kol Shabiyam Min Daghu. Anything in the water you could call a fish. Anything in the water you could call a fish. Kol Shabiyam Min Daghu. Kol Demashiyalai. Okay, now firstly, Rabbi say, it doesn't mean that's what dug means. It just means bedoichek. If somebody uses the word fish, you could construe that it doesn't just mean something that has fins and scales, but any aquatic creature. But it would be doichek to say that it fits into the Rambam or Tosfos. When they say explicitly it's a fish, it would be even doichek to say it fits into Rashi, but you would have to fit it into Rashi at best. So I heard a shiur a couple years ago from Rabbi Yisrael Reisman, Shlita, Rashiva and Tarvadas. He's the Rav of the Agudah Madison in Brooklyn, and he gave a shiur about the Murex trunculus. And I called him up if I could see some of his notes on the subject. So he told me they had recently been printed, and I asked him if I could have a copy of them. So he was kind enough to email to me his personal copy of his notes. And he had 8 questions on the Murex trunculus from Shas and from the Rambam. So I brought over here 3 of his questions, the 3 questions that I felt were extremely compelling, and just to share with you. So Rabbi Reisman says, wait a second. The Rambam says it's a dog. Tosfos says it's a dog. The Murex trunculus is not a dog. So you'll say, like the Gra on Masechta Kelim, that any aquatic creature is a fish. It's doichek. That's not a smooth reading of the Rambam and Tosfos, that it's really referring to the Murex trunculus, but it's calling it a dog. Now, in one of the classic Svarim on Techeles called Lula Ois Techeles, they bring, no, it's not so bad, because William Cole writes in his writings that in Latin the word fish could include all aquatic creatures, which is sort of laughable. Good for William Cole. What does William Cole got to do with the Rambam? The Rambam's not writing in Latin. The Rambam is one of the codifiers of halacha. So just because somebody claims that in Latin the word fish is an all-inclusive claim, that is a laughable argument to say that when the Rambam says dog, that includes all aquatic creatures? That would be very difficult to say. So what do those who okay, that's question number 1. So question number 1 is the Rambam says dog, Tosfos says dog. This ain't no dog. Question number 2, the Rambam says v'damai shachar kediyai, that the ink of the chilazon is black like blood. There's one problem. The blood of the Murex trunculus is not black. Does anybody know what color it is? Colorless. It doesn't have a color, and sometimes it has a yellowish tinge, but it's not black. So how in the world does it fit into the Rambam? The answer is, if you leave it out long enough, it will turn black. So will supper. So what? That's what the Rambam means. The Rambam says the blood of the chilazon is black like ink. So how could it be the Murex trunculus? The blood of the Murex trunculus is clear, it's yellow. Yes, it turns black. So does everything in this world, turns black eventually. That's what the Rambam means. So you know what they say? You know what the Sefer Lula Techeles says? The Rambam was wrong. The Rambam was wrong. Why? Because the Rambam didn't have a tradition what Techeles is. The Rambam got it from Aristotle. I don't think I need to tell you that this is not the halachik process. That when you make a discovery, you say the discovery is correct and the Rambam is wrong. Mi nidchem mipnei mi. Who gets pushed away? The snail or the Rambam? Who has stronger footing? A blob inside a shell or Maimonides? So you're going to say the blob is the Techeles and the Rambam was wrong? Or the Rambam is correct and maybe we don't have the right discovery? Not everything we discover means that it's the chilazon.
But where did the Rambam get that it's the blood is black?
The same thing where the Rambam got every single thing that he got. Either from Shas, or the Yushalmi, or the Midrashim, or a Masorah. Because when the Rambam gets something from secular information, he lets us know. For example, in Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh, the Rambam says, I have to tell you, friends, that I have no tradition about this. All of my information about calculating intercalation comes from the tradition of the Greeks. The reason why, says the Rambam, is the Jewish people used to have a tradition about Kiddush HaChodesh from the sons of Yisachar, Mibnei Yisachar, Yodei Ho'itim. However, that tradition was lost. Therefore, since it was lost, I have no better source of information than Greek scientists. Says the Rambam, how am I allowed to rely on them? So the Rambam says as follows, that if it's not speculative, it's not thesis, it's measurable science, we could determine, we could authenticate whether they're accurate or not, and therefore I'm entitled to rely on the Greek astronomers. So what do you see from that? That when the Rambam is getting information, not from... when the Rambam is getting information from secularists, he lets us know, he's not embarrassed to tell us. The fact that the Rambam says, Damai Shachar Kediyai, you're going to say he got it from Aristotle, and now that we found shells on the Mediterranean coast, we're going to say the Rambam is wrong, and the Murex Trunculus is the...
But what's the Rambam's source?
We don't know the source of half of the things the Rambam says.
Okay, but others say that it's different, it's a Torah.
Okay. That doesn't mean the Rambam got it from Aristotle.
I'm not saying he got it from Aristotle, but...
We don't know. We don't know any of the Rambam sources. The Rambam never gave any sources. That's why you have the Kesef Mishnah and the Maggid Mishnah who struggle. What is the source of the Rambam? By the way, there are many things that the Rambam writes that there is no known source. I'll give you one example. I'll give you an incredible example. The Rambam says, Kol HaKoyes Keilu Kol HaKoyes Keilu Nu Oyved Avodah Zarah. Everybody knows Keilu Oyved Avodah Zarah. Where does it say that, by the way? Gemara, right? There's no such Gemara. The Gemara says nowhere, Kol HaKoyes Keilu Oyved Avodah Zarah. The Gemara says, Kol HaMekareya Begadav Meshaver Kelav Bechamasa Yiu Beinecha Kilu Oyved Avodah Zarah. That if you break things, it should be like Avodah Zarah. But how does the Rambam know Kol HaKoyes Kilu Oyved Avodah Zarah? Where does it say that? Not one Gemara, not one Yerushalmi, Mechilta, Sifra, Sifri. The only place that it says Kol HaKoyes Kilu Oyved Avodah Zarah is the Zohar. The problem is the Rambam didn't have the Zohar. So there are many tshuvas on this, that the Rambam apparently had ancient documents that or midrashim that we're not privy to. So just because the Rambam says Damai Shachar Kediyah, the Rambam, I guarantee you, did not get Kol HaKoyes Kilu Oyved Avodah Zarah from Aristotle. So just like you didn't get that from Aristotle, you didn't get this from Aristotle. So that's question number 2. The Rambam says the blood is black. The Murex Trunculus, the blood is not black. By the way, the blood of the cuttlefish is black, but that's not the chilazon. But to say it's the Murex Trunculus, number 3, and this is one of the strongest questions of all, and that is, if you want to get Techeles, guess what color you have to get? Blue! But the Murex Trunculus is not blue! It's purple! So guess what? They came up with a big discovery. You know why it's purple? Because they're doing it indoors. If you take it outdoors in direct sunlight, it turns blue. Meaning, the only way to get blue is to do it in direct sunlight. I have a question. Here you have Maimonides. He's telling you how to do it. He says it's a dog, it looks like Techeles, it's black, and you put it in the pot, and you put in spices like kamunya, and you dye it, and the Rambam left out the most important ingredient. They have to take it out in direct sunlight. Why would the Rambam leave out the main ingredient necessary in order to make it Techeles? So you say, of course, where else are you going to do it? Where else are you going to do it? Did anyone here ever go to a factory in their life? Do you know of any manufacturer that does anything outdoors in the Middle East? Nothing is manufactured outdoors in the Middle East, especially on the sea coast. You're going to burn. All the Techeles, all manufacturing is done indoors in a factory. Therefore, how in the world could you say that the Murex Trunculus is a chilazon? Number 1, it's not a dog. Number 2, the blood is not black. Number 3, the Rambam left out the most important ingredient that you need, direct sunlight. Is that a refutation? I leave that up to you. These are 3 pretty compelling questions on the Murex Trunculus. Again, number 1, it's not a fish. Number 2, the blood is not black. And number 3, it's making purple dye. The only way to get blue is to bring it out into sunlight. So they answered, you don't have to bring it out into sunlight. You could steam it. Does the Rambam say anything about steaming it? The Rambam doesn't say anything about steaming it.
What about the Gra? The Gra is it not Gra?
The Gra, in general, in Masechta Kelim says that when a Mishnah says the word dog, it could include all aquatic creatures. That doesn't necessarily mean that every time it says dog, it means all aquatic creatures. For examim, when the Torah says dogim, you're right, it's a doichik teretz. But you can't prove, you can't create, you can't identify positively that it is the Murex trunculus, because dog could also mean an aquatic creature. Okay, here's a fourth question which is almost impossible to answer. The Gemara says in number 9 that somebody who traps a chilazoin is chayev. Hatzad chilazoin chayev. One who traps a chilazoin is chayev. So it's very interesting. Right now, Mishnah Brura, the Dirshu program was up to Hilchos Tzad. So what's the halacha if you capture a sleeping deer on Shabbos? What's the halacha if you catch a deer on Shabbos? You're chayev. What about a sleeping deer? You're also chayev, because a deer will sort of realize that you're coming onto it, and when you get close, it will try to run away. A blind deer, you're chayev. A crippled deer, a sick deer, you're pater. Question. If you have a cow, and the cow roams out of its pen, and you catch it, are you chayev? No. Because it doesn't need to be trapped. It's not going anywhere. That's not called trapping. Trapping means that it would run away. Good question. Anybody ever see a Murex trunculus? Yeah. Anybody see how... Is a Murex trunculus a guy who gets around? He's a shell. He ain't moving anywhere. Could someone tell me, what would the halacha be if you catch a shell on Shabbos? You go to the beach and you catch a seashell. Are you chayev? Of course not. What? With something in it. It's not moving anywhere. Are you chayev? Of course not. So how could the Gemara say that if you catch the chilazon, you're chayev? If the chilazon is a Murex trunculus doesn't go anywhere, how could you be chayev for trapping it and catching it? You're not chayev for catching a shell. How could that be? What? Yeah, v'hapotzo. No, either one. Either hatzad or v'hapotzo. No. No, ella achas. If you do both, you're chayev. Wondering who this says you're chayev shtayim. Okay. So the actually in the institute they asked this question on the Murex trunculus, and they say that even though it doesn't really go anywhere, but since you need special scuba divers and special equipment and special nets, and it's a meleches uman, therefore you're chayev for trapping. Simply not true. You don't need special scuba divers, and you don't need special nets. You stand in the Mediterranean, you go down, you lift it up, and you take it. No special skill required. No training required. It's quite simple. It's not different than picking up any other rock on the bottom of the sea. How then can we explain that the Gemara says, Hatzad chilazain chayev? These are very compelling questions. Again, if it's not that compelling to you, it still doesn't identify positively that the Murex trunculus is the chilazon. Here's another question that Rav Herzog, Zechatzak Levracha, Zechusa Yogan Aleinu, today is his yahrzeit. Rav Herzog himself asked this question in number 13, the royal purple and the biblical blue, and it was expanded upon in an article in the Journal of Halachik and Contemporary Society, number 14. I have a question for you. You know, the Gemara tells us about how to make Techeles. But Techeles was not the only ancient dye that they used. There's also something called argaman. Could somebody please tell me why the Gemara doesn't tell you how to get argaman? What species, what creature do we catch to make argaman? Why does the Gemara only talk about Techeles and the Gemara doesn't talk about argaman? Rabbi said, do you know why the Gemara doesn't talk about argaman? Because we know how to make argaman. How? The way they made it. The Murex trunculus. They used the Murex trunculus to make argaman. And everybody knew about it. So it was not necessary for the Gemara to identify how to make argaman. This proof is called the proof by omission. There's a simple logic that argues against Murex trunculus. At the times of the Gemara, purple dyeing with Murex snails was pervasive. This may explain why the Gemara did not mention the source of argaman. Everyone knew Murex snails were famous. By the way, in some areas, more than half the population was employed by dyeing with Murex trunculus. It's like now, right now, it was like there were no accountants back then, so you were a dyer. That was the main occupation back then. Dyeing clothing with what? With Murex trunculus. Everybody knew what a Murex was. It sold for more than its weight in gold. The shell appeared on government coins. Royal edicts were issued to monopolize the use of dye. Even Pliny, one of the ancient naturalists, he writes about Murex dyeing process. There was even a term known for it in Greek and Latin, porphyra, purpura. I have a question for you, friends. If that's the reason why Chazal don't talk about the argaman, and if it was in fact so popular, could somebody tell me, is there any Gemara? What's a lion? Oh, you know what a lion is? It has a body of a tiger, and it has a head of a cat, and it has paws like this, and in the sun it looks like that. No, a lion is a lion. We don't need a whole lumdisha description of what a lion is. If the chilazon is a murex trunculus, why in the world do we have this cryptic Gemara with 90 different descriptions of what it is? Everybody knows what it is. It's the most common thing in the world. Do you have a Gemara? What's a horse? What's a horse? A horse, well, the legs are like this, and the head is like that, and it says neigh, and it runs. I mean, give me a break. Give me a break. We don't have any Gemaras that describe anything unless it's... You don't need description unless it's something that is obscure. The Murex trunculus was one of the most well-known items that the ancients knew about. They even used it for argaman. That's why the Gemara doesn't discuss argaman. So you say, what about all of the archaeological diggings? Okay, so one thing I have to... What about all the museums? So I think everybody understands that the fact that something isn't a museum, if anything, is a raya that it's sheker v'chazav. You believe what you see in museums? You go to Museum of Natural History, you actually believe what they display over there? It's been the same displays there for 30 years. Despite advances in science, the museums are the most backward places of scientific collection. Archaeological diggings, so let me explain something to you. This is very important to know. Where do they discover the Murex trunculus? Right? People want to know, are there archaeological findings that the Murex trunculus was used for dyeing? Absolutely. You know how many fossils of Murex trunculus they found? Millions and millions and millions and millions. They're found everywhere. Where are they found? Exactly where the Gemara talks about, by the way. The Gemara says, take a look at number 15. The Gemara says that Nevozradin, umidalas haaretz, hishir Nevozradin, rav tabachim, from the poor in Eretz Yisrael, Nevozradin left over, the chief executioner, lekarmim, to tend to the vineyards, uli yoigvim, karmin, tarni ravis, ve'eli malakde afarsimai, those who collected balsam, from Ein Gedi, Viad Ramsa. Yoigvim are those who trapped the chilazon. From where? Misulamai Shaltzor, from the cliffs of Tyre, Viad Haifa, until Haifa. And in fact, that is exactly where they find all of the archaeological evidence of the use of the Murex trunculus. The problem is, Rabbi Isai, the fact that they find evidence that the Murex was used for dyeing does not prove anything whatsoever. You know what it proves? That they used the Murex trunculus for dyeing. Yeah, but it doesn't prove that they use it for dyeing tzitzis. I have a question for you. What do you think they're going to find more of? Things used to dye clothing or things used to dye tzitzis? I have a question. What do you have more of? More shirts or more pair of tzitzis? More pants or more pair of tzitzis? More socks or more pairs of tzitzis? More suits or more pairs of tzitzis? Your wife. Who has more clothing? You or your wife?
Wife.
She's not wearing Techeles on her tzitzis. Okay, the dyeing industry was a major industry. So you're right, they find millions of Murex trunculus cracked open in the exact spot that we crack it open today. How does that prove that they use the Murex trunculus for tzitzis? What does that show? And it's very insulting if you're an intelligent person and somebody tries to use the archaeological findings to prove that this was used to cover tzitzis. That's insulting to your intelligence. Just because they found something that they used to color something, how does that prove that this is the chilazon? As if the only thing that was ever dyed was a chilazon. Everybody wore only white back then. Everything was white. There were no colored garments, except for the one string, according to the Rambam, that was blue. Come on.
Actually, wasn't it a crime to wear royal purple?
Yeah. Now, archaeological evidence. Look what it's written, number 16, Journal of Halachik and Contemporary Society. There can be little doubt that Murex trunculus was used in ancient dyeing. It has long been accepted that Murex trunculus was used for dyeing purple in ancient times. There is significant archaeological evidence to support this. However, all of the evidence suggests that it was used for purple dyeing. There is no evidence to suggest that Murex trunculus was used to dye blue. Take a look on the next paragraph. They found these shells, they're cracked in the exact spot to get the dye. This is a solid proof that Murex trunculus was used in ancient dyeing, but does not imply it was used for dyeing blue. A 13th century BCE potsherd from Sarepta has a stripe of dye from the Murex trunculus. They found the stripe of dye from the Murex trunculus. Guess what color they found it to be? Purple. A vat from a dig at Tel Shikmona has a purple Murex dye on it. Not blue as the brochure of the Institute says it was. Pliny speaks about the Murex. You know what color he says? Purple, red, and violet. So, yes, there's a lot of archaeological finding. How does that lend that this is the chilazon? How does that prove it's a chilazon? Rabbi Reisman writes very strongly that in number 17, by the way, I asked him permission to put his notes on the Mar Makaimos. He says, Masha Pirsamu, that which it's become widespread, Shamatsu Babaris Samaris, Alfe Morkish, Nespatsu, the fact that they found in pits and caves thousands of these murex, that doesn't add anything. This is just propaganda. Bishkarim, kilu yesh by haichacha koshehu. Ve'ein haichacha, only that, the only thing it proves is that it was used. How does that prove it was used for tzitzis? Believe me, if you find for me an ancient garment of tzitzis, dyed blue, in the proximity of the Murex trunculus, now we got something to talk about. But the fact that you find vats with snails cracked open for coloring, that proves anything? How does that prove anything? I mean, for real, that's really an argument? Now, I'll tell you the truth. There's a very well-known Talmud Chacham, I'm not saying his name right now, who offered what he says is irrefutable evidence that the Murex trunculus is Techeles, because they found on the shields of Bar Kochva, on the coins of Bar Kochva, the image, the emblem of the Murex trunculus. Would they put a tamei animal on Bar Kochva's coin? Of course not. It must be it was used for the chilazon. That's a proof that it was used for tzitzis. The Murex trunculus was on coins before Bar Kochva. The Murex trunculus was on coins after Bar Kochva. The Murex trunculus was a status symbol. You know, some people, they get a shirt, and there's a little guy on a horse on it with playing a game that probably nobody ever played, right? Polo. Now, if you're going to get a polo shirt, and they're going to say, here, you pay the same $50, but we're just going to take off the emblem. Who in their right mind would wear the shirt without the whole godless of the shirt as the emblem? You want people to know that you paid big bucks for the shirt. I have a question. You have a Yid, he's wearing a crocodile on his shirt. Right? There's a crocodile on his shirt. Oh, it must be, it's a kosher behema. Because it was a kosher behema, why are so many Yidden wearing Izad shirts? That's a raya. Now we could do shchita on it because somebody wears it on their shirt. Imagine somebody bought that shirt and he said, Rabbi Yid, you could wear it, but we have to take off the emblem. He said, no, the whole godless of the shirt is the emblem. Imagine we tell you, you could drive whatever car you want, but we're going to remove the chaya from the him, right? If somebody buys a Jaguar, but we're going to take off the Jaguar. So the guy would say, then I might as well drive a Toyota. The only reason I'm driving this car is I want people to know what I'm driving. So the fact that Bar Kochva and Bar Kochva's time, they didn't have Izad, they didn't have Lexus, they had Murex trunculus, is a raya, that's what tzitzis is made out of? I mean, but Mechilas Kvoidai, that's a halachik argument? Because on the coin of Bar Kochva, they had a picture of a Murex trunculus? That would seem rather weak. It was a status symbol. It was the major industry of the time. As we mentioned, some regions, half the population was involved in dyeing from the Murex trunculus. Bottom line is, there are a lot of serious questions on it. You want to answer them, the Gra and Kalim, and we'll stuff it into Rashi, and the Rambam meant you'll take it out into the sun. You can't create and identify positively what Techeles is with these types of dechukim and these types of difficulty. In fact, now I'm only bringing this in for one point. I don't want anybody to think this is a case of poskim versus scientists. So the scientists, they have modern research and they have analysis and they're dealing with the facts. And the rabbis are basing themselves off the Gemara. So okay, we'll follow the rabbis because that's the way we do it. But really we know that if we would study it in a more up-to-date way, we would come to different... No, I want you to just be aware that even in the world of academia, it is far from unanimous that the Murex Trunculus is the Techeles. Not every... In fact, here we have an article that he brings down, in summary, the case of Murex Trunculus as a chazan has little merit. Indeed, the evidence against Murex Trunculus as a chazan is overwhelming. Murex Trunculus meets few of the secondary criteria. It does not meet any of the primary criteria. It depends on new interpretations of the Gemara that contradict classical Mefarshim. It would seem odd that something that was so well known, the Gemara wouldn't just say straight up. It's the purpura, the same thing that Argaman is. So therefore, just be aware that before you accept and you drink, you take in what the defenders of this Techeles are offering, you should know it's certainly far from unanimous that even in the world of academia, this is in fact the Murex Trunculus. So you'll say, yeah, but what do I have to lose? So it's 50-50. Or even if it's 75-25. But maybe this is the Techeles, and if it is, I'm fulfilling a mitzvah saseh d'oraisa b'shlei musa, so it's worth taking the chance. It's not like I'm losing anything. It's not like something bad will happen if I wear it and it turns out not to be the Techeles. Not so fast. Not so fast. The Gemara in Bava Metzia talks about those who, instead of putting on real Techeles, they get kala ilan. Right? Kala ilan is the impostor of the Techeles. And the Ben Yehoyada and the Ben Ishchai wants to know, why does the Gemara always talk about the impostor of Techeles? Why doesn't the Gemara say, watch out, be careful, you don't put comic books in your tefillin? Be careful, you don't take a lemon for the Daled Minim. Why always hooked up on the Techeles? Don't take the indigo, don't take the Kala Ilan. So the Ben Yehoyada says, actually, that of course, when it comes to other mitzvahs, we're not as worried, we're not as scared. But Kala Ilan is actually, if you're not getting the real thing and instead you get Kala Ilan is actually very harmful and very dangerous. In fact, the Ben Yehoyada writes, Kala is Gematria 131, the same Gematria as the Samach Mem. The Samach Mem is Samach Mem Aleph Lamed, to teach that if you don't get the real Techeles, and you get the fake and you get the phony, you should know you're not just doing something harmless. On those strings, who's hanging on to those strings? The Malach HaMaves, the Samach Mem himself. And therefore, says the Ben Yehoyada, the Gemara always warns, be careful you get the real deal, be careful you get the real deal, be careful you get the real deal. Because if you don't get the real deal, and you get the raw deal, then guess who's going to be hanging on to the corners of your garment? Somebody who you would really prefer not to be hanging around with you, and that is the Sarai Shalesav. So in fact, it's interesting, they asked Rav Shlomo Miller, one of the big poskim today, he's poskim in Canada and then Lakewood, they asked him, what do you say about the Murex Trunculus? So he said, he doesn't agree that he doesn't agree that, it doesn't hurt. Yeah, it does hurt. Because based on this Ben Yehoyada, if you're not getting the real deal, then instead of walking around with complete fulfillment of mitzvah saseh d'oraisa, the angel of death is now permanently attached to your clothing. So he says he does not recommend taking a chance when it comes to the Techeles. Now I'll tell you the truth. One of the Talmidei Chacham associated with Techeles wrote back to him, and he would seem to be making a very correct argument. And that is, in the scheme of things, if you have the opportunity to be Mekayim a mitzvah saseh d'oraisa, but if you're not, there's a jeopardy of this Kabbalistic reason of Kala Ilan, which is associated with the Malach HaMaves. How could you forego the possibility of being Mekayim a mitzvah saseh d'oraisa at the expense of this svara. This is not a halachic svara. We can't bring this svara into the halachic arena. We're going to really tell people not to be choishesh for a safek d'oraisa because of this Kabbalistic reason. Kabbalistic reasons are nice if everything is equal, all things being equal. But if there's a possibility that we can mekayim a mitzvah d'oraisa b'shleimos, we're not going to give it up because of this safek. And therefore he writes that if somebody in earnest is putting on the Techeles made from the Murex trunculus, because he feels, you know what, you never know, maybe I'm being mekayim a mitzvah saseh d'oraisa. Look at number 23, Rebbe Eliyahu Tavgar. Chas v'shalom, to say that in case he's not getting it right, he's, drumming up the samach mem that might be associated with kala ilan. So to say not to put it on because if it's kala ilan, you're in danger of this Kabbalistic concern, that's a hard argument to make. Those who want to say that in fact the Techeles has been discovered, they invoke a prophecy from Rav Shamshin Me'ash Tripoli. Who's Rav Shamshin Me'ash Tripoli? Rav Shamshin Me'ash Tripoli was one of the great Mikubalim in the 17th century. Rav Shamshin Me'ash, it's okay, I'm just stretching. Rav Shamshin Me'ash Tripoli was one of the great Mikubalim, 1648, 1649. And Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, in the Alkut Yosef, in Archaim Siman Tes, page Kuf Yud Gimel, brings down that it's said in the name of Rav Shamshin Me'ash Tripoli from the Arizal, that from the time the Beis HaMikdash has been destroyed, the Techeles has been nignaz. However, in the year Taf Reish is 1840, Tzitzis Techeles will be discovered again. Like the Zohar says of Ishis Mei Ashnen L'Shisa, Yiftechon Tarin de Chachmasa. An amazing prophecy of Rav Shamshin Tripoli that Techeles will be discovered in the year 1840. Zaraya, that the Murex trunculus is the correct Techeles. First of all, the Murex trunculus was not discovered in 1840. You know what was discovered in 1840? The cuttlefish. And that ain't no Techeles. So then you'll ask, so what did Rav Shamshin Tripoli mean that the Techeles will be discovered? I don't know. But guess what? That's not how halacha works. Just because a makubal makes a prediction that something will be discovered in a certain year, that does not positively halacha identify something as the correct Techeles. So Rabbi say, nothing we said so far is really a halachic imperative. We've had some very strong questions on the Murex trunculus. And what I'd like to conclude with, but I need some time here, is halacha l'maisa. What should an observant Jew do? Is there a strong case for the Murex trunculus? Is it a safek? If it's a safek, then l'chayra a person should be choishesh for it. What is the correct and proper procedure for an observant Jew, a Jew who wants to fulfill the halacha in the best possible way? What should we do halacha l'maisa? So let's start with the Sfardim. Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, in the Yalkut Yosef Siman Tes, writes that which they claim that they found today, Techeles and Tzitzis, it is not clear. Therefore, we do not see too many Gedolei Hadar that wear it. So what should a Yid do? Whenever you don't know what to do, you should follow the Gedolei Hadar. And do the Gedolei Hadar wear Techeles? They do not wear Techeles. And if the Gedolei Hadar do not wear Techeles, believe me, they're rather astute people. They know the information, they've been around the block, and they're not ignoring the information, and they've obviously come to the conclusion that they're not convinced. And if the Gedolei Hadar don't wear it, then neither should we. So you'll say, but who are the Gedolei Hadar? How are you supposed to know who the Gedolei Hadar are? Says Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, I'll tell you who the Gedolei Hadar are. I'll let you know. You want to know who they are? Let me tell you who they are. In the last generation, for the Sfardim, we were zoicha to see the Gedolei Hadar. Rabbi Ezra Atiyah, Rabbi Yaakov Adas, Rabbi Vadia Haidaya. Not one of them was even concerned, mashahu. They had no suspicion at all to wear the Techeles. Even the Gedolim in Bnei Brak, the Chazoin Ish, when they brought him Techeles, he said, no thank you. The Stipler, who was machmir in every single chumrah of tzitzis, but not when it came to Techeles. Says Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, Zakanim as Vainan. if Rabbi Avadia, Hidayah, if Rabbi Ezra, Atiyah, if Rabbi Yaakov, Adas, if the Chazoin Ish, if the Stipler, we're not interested in this, then who are we to say, well, I think I'm smarter, I think I'm better? It would not be appropriate for an observant Jew to act out of line with the way the Gedolei Hadar have conducted themselves. Is it gaiva to wear Techeles, says Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef? No, because maybe those who have done research have a point of view, but should you wear Techeles? No, you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't do it. Why not? The Gedolei Hadar have not worn Techeles.
Maybe it's a suffix to your rights that you should wear.
Yeah, the Gedolei Hadar are familiar with the concept of suffix d'oraisa l'chumra.
So why did the Gedolei Hadar?
Because they don't have a suffix. Because of all these questions we've raised, they think it's dead wrong. They think it's a scam. They don't buy the archaeological evidence. They think this is not a fish. This is not black ink. This is not. You have to bring it down to the sun. Of all the questions, these Gedolei Hadar, they didn't care. The Stipler was concerned for every suffix d'Rabbanan and every chumrah. That means this he did not buy. He was astute enough to realize that this is not the real deal. They once asked a Chazoin Ish, well, it doesn't hurt. He says it also doesn't hurt to wear glasses with no lenses in it. That also doesn't hurt. He said it doesn't hurt to wear your hat upside down. A lot of things don't hurt. It doesn't hurt to put your socks on your ears. It doesn't hurt. Never hurt anybody.
But if there's a possibility, just let's
Exactly. Since if there's a possibility you should do it, the fact that they didn't do it means, what do they think? It's not a possibility. They asked Rabbi Avadia Yosef. Alvin, you're on the ball today. They asked Rabbi Avadia Yosef. Should you wear the Techeles of the Radzina Rebbe? He said you don't have to. They said, Rabbi Avadia, is it usher? It's not usher. So he said, so why don't we do it? Because we have a tradition from the Arizal that we will not have until Mashiach comes. And then Rabbi Avadia said the following in a shiur. He said, for 1,000 years the tradition in Klal Yisrael has been that we will not have chilazon until Mashiach comes, and nothing has occurred to shake us off that tradition. Again, how compelling is all of this? Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef is not bringing a halachik reason not to do it. He's merely observing the fact that the Gedolim didn't do it, and making that observation, he's saying, neither should we. Rabbi Avadia did not wear Techeles, and he told other people not to. As far as I'm concerned, the seminal tshuva on this topic was penned by Moran Harav Agoin, Rav Yosef, Shalom, El Yashav, Zecher, Tzaddik, Levracha. This is the final, as far as I'm concerned, the case closed tshuva on this issue. And the reason I say that is for a number of reasons. Rabbi Yosef did not write many tshuvas like other Gedolim. He selected very carefully what he wrote about. He wrote very bekitzer, and he avoided controversial issues. So if he took the time to write a tshuva about this issue, that must have been he was pretty confident about it, and he felt it was important for Klal Yisrael to know this. And we have to look at who wrote the tshuva to him. Because people like to say, well, I know the Gedolei Hadar don't do it, but I know big Rabbanim who do it. And I will not deny that. There are big Talmidei Chachamim who do wear Techeles, but the Gedolei Hadar do not unanimously. And therefore, the point I'm making is as follows. We have to look, who wrote this tshuva to Rav Elyashiv? Rav Feivel Cohen. Who's Rav Feivel Cohen? Rav Feivel Cohen is a great Talmud Chacham in his own right. He wrote the Badei HaShulchan. He literally was a machriya on hundreds, if not thousands, of machloikesin on Yoreh De'ah. So why does he have to ask Rabbi Elyashiv? Why can't he just paskin like he does thousands of times? The answer is this is such a fundamental issue that affects all of Klal Yisrael. This is not a decision for a regular Talmud Chacham. After all, doesn't every Jew need to know how should my tzitzis be? And Rabbi Elyashiv wrote equivocally not to do it for 5 reasons. Reason number 1, said Rabbi Elyashiv, I'm no youngster, says Rabbi Elyashiv. I've been around the block. And you see the tzidkos of Rabbi Elyashiv. He says one of the Gedolei Ha'admorim, And you see the righteousness of Rabbi Yashiv. He doesn't want to write who it is. We all know who it is. We've studied it extensively now. This is our 5th shiur on the subject. Thought he found the Chilazain. He shook the world. He found the Chilazain. And what happened soon after that? Rav Herzog came and clearly debunked the Techeles of the Radziner Rebbe. And Rav Herzog's Techeles, the Jantina snail, was clearly debunked. So do you think, says Rabbi Yashiv, that just because scientists today think it's a Murex trunculus, who's to say that in 10 years scientists won't come? I have a question for you. Do you think we've maximized our knowledge of this planet, or is there still a lot more to learn about science and biology? Very likely we don't know as much as we think we know. I mean, every 10 years, it's like we say, we were so primitive back then. Who's to say, said Rabbi Yashiv, if the first discovery was disproved, if the second discovery was disproved? I mean, come on. You have to be aware of the historic trends. You can't get caught up in a fad. This is the verdict of history. The verdict of history is that when it comes to trying to identify the Chilazain, after a certain amount of time, they prove that it is not correct. That's the first argument of Rabbi Yashiv. Number 2, we all know the argument of the Beis Halevi. Now, it's interesting. In our second shiur, we had 2 versions of the story, and Rabbi Yashiv clearly is learning like one of them. The argument of the Beis Halevi was, what was the argument of the Beis Halevi? That since the Murex trunculus was since the cuttlefish was known for many, many years, and it wasn't used, that is tantamount to having a Mesorah that it's not the Chilazain. Says Rabbi Yashiv, I'm not sure. Why can't we use the same argument against the Murex trunculus? The Murex trunculus was known for many, many years. Why don't we say that's tantamount to having a Mesorah that it's not the Chilazain? Number 3, says Rabbi Yashiv, the Goin of Kutna, Rabbi Yeshua Milakutna, said for 1,000 years the presumption in Klal Yisrael was that Techeles was lost. So what changed exactly? Number 4, and this might be the strongest argument of all. Rabbi Yashiv says, you don't remember the Machlokes Rashi and the Rambam? Rashi says that the Techeles is only kosher without ingredients, without other additives. The Rambam says you must put in other additives. Who do we paskin like? We don't know. That means however you do it, 50% chance you're doing it wrong. We are not capable, says Rabbi Yashiv. Maybe someone else thinks they are capable. Rabbi Yashiv says, I am not capable of paskening who is correct, Rashi or the Rambam. And possibly the strongest argument of all is that you do have a lot to lose. And what do you have to lose? The Rama writes in Siman Tasiv Katan Hey.
28.
In 28, 29, the Rama writes in Siman Tas Sifhei that the tzitzis must be the color of the garment l'chatchila. I have a question for you. If I take my strings and I color them with a magic marker, are they kosher? Yeah? There are only 3 possibilities. Yes, no, or I don't know. If I take my tzitzis and I color them with a magic marker green, are they kosher? Yes. No. They're only b'diavad. L'chatchila, they're not kosher. Why not? We paskin knaf min haknaf, which means l'chatchila, the tzitzis must be the color of the garment. So how do you ever make Techeles? Techeles is the exception. Says Rabbi Yashiv, if this is not Techeles, your tzitzis are pasul. L'chatchila. B'diavad not. L'chatchila, yeah. So you're going to take a far out shot and you're going to color your strings. If you do and you got it wrong and you bet wrong, you blew it because you're not Mekayim in the mitzvah l'chatchila. Therefore, says Rabbi Yashiv, we are mitzapeh to the salvation of Hashem that He should send us Mashiach and Eliyahu to give us the correct psak. But until then, stick with your white strings.
Why shouldn't that require you to put on 2 pairs of tzitzis? One with Techeles.
Because you don't have to wear 2 pairs of tzitzis. There's no such thing as wearing 2 pairs of tzitzis.
Because it's not good. It's 4 corners.
That's all these rabbanim.
No.
If you wanted to wear
On any issue, you could find Rabbanim both ways. I'm telling you, my argument is that when you don't know what to do, you follow the Gedolei Hadar. And the Gedolei Hadar unanimously have not worn the tzitzis. Okay, I'm not done. As far as I'm concerned, this tshuva of Rebbe Yashiv, Man Yashem El Yashiv, is the case closed tshuva. Rabbi Yashiv did not get involved in controversy. He presented 5 compelling arguments not to do it. Now, I don't have a problem. If you're a Rebbe, if you have a Rebbe, and he wears Techeles, and he's a Rebbe, you could follow him. As long as you follow everything he says. Now, you're going to tell me your Rebbe who wears it, and I'm going to tell you other things he says that you don't do. Okay? So be careful before you say, I follow this one and that one. I'm talking about a regular Yid. If he doesn't know what to do, you follow the Gedolei Hadar. Well, you don't follow regular Rabbanim, you follow the Gedolei Hadar. Rav Feivel Cohen is a great Talmid Chacham, but he said, this is not in my department. We're sending this to the top. Now, let me ask you something. I want to ask you a question on Rabbi Yashiv. Rabbi Yashiv offered 5 arguments. Does it seem like Rabbi Yashiv left out the most compelling argument at all, one of them that we gave in the second shiur? And that is, remember we asked, how in the world are you supposed to make Techeles? How do you do it? 1 string like the Rambam, 2 strings like the Ravid, 4 strings like Tosis. Why doesn't Rabbi Yashiv say, well, you don't know how to do it anyway? The Razina Rebbe said we'll go like the Rambam. So why didn't Rabbi Yashiv say, we don't know how to paskin like that machlekes? So I saw in Rav Hershel Schachter's Sefer, he makes a very good point. Because it happens to be on this machlekes of how many strings to make blue, we do have a psak. Mysteriously, the Mishnah Berurah paskins on this. And the Mishnah Berurah paskins like Tosfos, that if you would have blue wool and Techeles, you know how many strings you should make? 4. The Mishnah Berurah in Siman Tes Sivkatan Zayin, Mishnah Berurah there in Sivkatan Yadad brings down from the Arzaz Chaim the Malbim that you make 4 strings blue and 4 strings right. So Rav Hershel Schachter is correct. Regarding the machlokes, people say, well, you can't do Techeles because you don't know how many strings. We do know how many strings. That's something the Mishnah Berurah paskin on. But regarding, you see, look at the brilliance of Rabbi Yashiv. Rabbi Yashiv knew exactly what the arguments were. He didn't say, well, we don't know how many strings to make blue. Rabbi Yashiv knew the Mishnah Berurah. If the Chavetz Chaim offers a psak, that you could take to the bank. But the Chavetz Chaim never offered a psak of whether you put in Samamonim or you don't put in Samamonim. Therefore, number 1, says Rabbi Yashiv, this story is the oldest story on the hills. You know, this story is as old as the hills. Every time someone thinks they found Techeles, a decade later they disprove it. Number 2, we knew about the Mirach Strunculus for hundreds of years. We didn't use it. For 1,000 years, the Messiah was Nignaz. How do we do it? Rashi or the Rambam? And even if we know what to do, if we didn't get it right, l'charchila, your tzitzis won't be kosher. Now, did Rebbe Yashiv say you're not allowed to wear Techeles? No. He just said, don't do it. He didn't say you're not allowed to. Comes Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and in the Sefer Das Noite, he was asked in Shuva Reishai and Gimel, is there any makom lahachmir for those who say they found the true Techeles? Reb Chaim Kanievsky says, no. Ein v'divreihem mamish. There's no substance into what they're saying. It is impossible to create new halachos based on theory without a Kabbalah. But they asked Reb Chaim, but from many poskim, it's mavuar, like from the Arzaz Chaim and the Radvaz, that it could be Techeles will come back. Says Reb Chaim, that's right, when Mashiach comes, it could come back. So somebody emailed me a few times that there's a Ramban in Parshas Tetzaveh that seems to say that we do have Techeles Hayom, and they showed it to Reb Chaim, and Reb Chaim was Chayzar. If Reb Chaim tells me he's Chayzar, I'll believe it. I'm assuming, I'll give Reb Chaim the benefit of the doubt that he was familiar with the Rambans, and he still maintained that Nignaz means Nignaz. By the way, look in the footnote over here. It says Reb Chaim, did anybody hear of an institute, the Institute of the Discovery of the Mun, that they found a flask of mun, and they now have discovered what the mun looked like? No, because the mun was Nignaz. Did anybody have an institute that they found the Aron, the lost ark? The only one who found the lost ark is not for the shiur. Oh, that you're up for. Okay, good, fine. So, Did anybody ever create an institute for the staff of Aaron HaKoyen? The answer is no. All these things are nignaz beroimi, and says Reb Chaim, if all of these things are nignaz is nignaz, then guess what? Then when Chazal say the Techeles is nignaz, that's what nignaz means. They asked Reb Chaim, what if you're on a desert island and you only have one pair of tzitzis and it has Techeles on it? Should you wear it? No, can't put it on. You can't put it on. Why? Because you're going to fool people to think that this is really Techeles. You're not to fool people. Better not to wear anything than to wear this. Are you over a mitzvah sasei doiraisa of Baal Tosef? No, you're not over any Yisurim. But if you only have one pair of tzitzis, what's better, not to wear it or to wear it? In this sefer, it says, Reb Chaim said, don't wear it. Let's say you see somebody wearing it. Should you be moicha?
No.
If you want to. If you want to. If you want to. However, they came out with a tshuva from Reb Sternbach, and Reb Sternbach was not so kind. They asked him, are you over a mitzvah sasei doiraisa if you put on Techeles about Tosef? He says, probably. He said, why? Why can't you make a t'nai, like by Tefillin Rabbeinu Tam, that if it's not the mitzvah, I don't want to be mekayim the asei doiraisa? He says, probably a t'nai only works if it might be the mitzvah, you can make a t'nai, then in case it's not, I don't want to be yotzei. But if there's no chance that it's the right thing, then it could be a t'nai doesn't help. What the Baal Tosef of coloring it a color which is not a color the Torah never said.
So is that wearing 3 tzitzis or 5 tzitzis?
No, neither.
So it's Baal Tosef?
To color the tzitzis that's not mandated by the Torah, in his opinion, that's not normally. Rabbi Yashiv had no problem with Baal Tosef. Chaim Kanievsky didn't have a problem with Baal Tosef. I'm just bringing in because people say, well, there's nothing to lose. There's nothing to lose. Not so fast that there's nothing to lose. Not so clear that there's nothing to lose. So living in America, I think a question that everybody should have is, what did Reb Moshe hold? What did Reb Moshe hold? It's very hard to answer that question. It's not clear exactly how much of this research was available in the time of Reb Moshe. I asked Rav Baruch Maskowitz, who learns with Reb David Feinstein every day, what does Reb David hold? And at the time that he shared with this with me, I don't think his second volume of Shas V'Tshuvos V'Dibarta Bam was out. This might be in his new volume, I don't know. But he shared with me his notes of his second edition of V'Dibarta Bam, that Reb David Feinstein was taken to the institute, and they showed him the whole process, and he didn't buy it. He didn't buy it. No, when I say he didn't buy it, not that he didn't purchase it. He didn't. That he had questions on it, and he didn't accept it. He didn't accept it. And he said Rav Moshe didn't either. Rav Moshe didn't either. And the Gdolei Yisrael have not accepted it as well. So therefore, his conclusion is Shev va'al tasa adif. Mar v'raboisai. Again, I'm basei. I don't come here lekanter. I'm not coming here to. Sorry. I'm not coming here to instigate. I'm just coming to present what I think is normative halacha. This is a situation where there's a certain uncertainty. What is Techeles? And the Gedolei Yisrael, whenever we don't know what to do, we have to follow the Einei Ha'ida. Now, you're allowed to follow your Rebbe if this is your Rebbe and you follow him for everything. But if it's a matter that affects all of Klal Yisrael, and you see great people are machnia daitam to the Gedolei Yisrael, believe me, if Reb Moshe, if Rav Aaron Kotler, if Rav Avadia Yosef, if Rav Yashiv, if Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, if the Tzitz Eliezer, if you could find me one of the great Gedolei Hadar of the last century, you say, you know what? I wear Techeles, then there's something to talk about. But it's pretty unanimous that the top Gedolei Hadar of the last century, they don't wear it. And if they do, they don't let anybody know that they wear it. Reb Chaim Kanievsky, the Stipler, the Chazon Ish, they don't wear it. Ram Leitch Steinman didn't wear it. He wore 100 pairs. The fact that he wore one at Techeles, I don't know, is, he probably did. As one of them. It's interesting. The story goes like this. The story goes that in the times of the Radzina Rebbe, so, he was promoting and promulgating his Techeles, and a chassid, somebody who was anti-Radzina Techeles, he came along, he said, like, enough is enough. He ripped it off the guy, he tore it up, and he came to Rav Shmuel Salant and said, what do I... He said, Gavaldik, you're like Pinchas, you're Mekanek Kinas Hashem. Just find out how much it costs and you got to pay him back, You still owe him the money. So you'll say as follows, so what are we supposed to do if we don't have Techeles? What are we supposed to do? So I'll share with you, somebody sent me an email, very interesting, Mara Makoim. There's a Kav HaYashar in Perek Memhei. Kav HaYashar tells us a little secret, a little side, about Techeles. The gematria of Techeles, he says, is 850. Ayin is 130. Ayin is 70, Yud is 10, Nun is 50, 130. The other Ayin is 130, 260. Tzitzis is 590. Tzitzis plus Ayin is 850, the gematria of Techeles. Meaning, he says, I have a Kabbalistic tradition that you should look at your tzitzis and be mechavein tor Techeles, and it's keilu, you're mekayim it, and Hashem will remove all of the impediments and all of the choshech that covers this world. Let me end off with a beautiful idea that Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz writes. He says like this. He's talking in the context of who is the great hero of Purim? Esther. Esther had no father, Esther had no mother. Why did Hashem set it up that the great heroine in the times of Purim was somebody who had no father, no mother? Because she had to counteract Haman. Haman was coming with the zechus of Esav. Esav's zechus was the zechus of kibbud avayim. Who could possibly counteract the zechus of kibbud avayim of Esav? But there's a rule that someone who wants to be mekayim a mitzvah and is limited by circumstance and yearns to fulfill the mitzvah, it's considered as if they will fulfill the mitzvah in the highest possible way. Because they're not actually doing it. God is giving them and bestowing upon them the mitzvah. And when God bestows upon you a mitzvah, He doesn't bestow on you an ordinary mitzvah, He bestows on you a perfect mitzvah. Therefore, in order to counteract Haman, God had to create the hero who not only doesn't have a father and mother, never saw her father, never saw her mother, yearned her whole life to Mekayim Kibbud Avayim, and Hashem treated it as if she was fulfilling Kibbud Avayim in the highest possible way. Says Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, we have very few mitzvahs b'zman hazeh. We don't have karbanos. We don't have mitzvahs hatzuyas ba'aretz, many of them. We don't have mitzvahs that depend on the Beis HaMikdash. Even the great mitzvah of tzitzis, we cannot do b'shleimus. Avo zois nechamaseinu. This is our consolation. That whenever we're not able to mekayim a mitzvah, anybody whose heart pains them, that they're not able to fulfill the mitzvah fully, Hashem looks into their heart, and Hashem says, you know what? I see the yearning you have to fulfill the mitzvah. Therefore, says Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, Choiva al kol ish, it is an obligation on every person. Besumay tzitzis bebigdai. When you put tzitzis on, lizkar b'mitzvah Techeles. You must think about the mitzvah of Techeles. And you should moan and you should groan, amasnayim, that you can't fulfill it. And if you're able to do that, and if you're able to engender a real desire to mekayim the mitzvah of Techeles, then Hashem will credit you with Techeles in the most perfect, beautiful way. So, Mar Rabbi say, is it correct to wear Techeles? I believe it's more correct not to wear Techeles. I'll tell you a personal thought, and you could agree with it, you could disagree with it. It's a free country. I have a question. Let's say it turns out that it is Techeles, and somebody decided to wear it. Klape Shmaya Galia. Turns out it was Techeles. And a person wore it. Do you think they get reward in Shemayim? Question. Let's say the person, you said, the Gedolim said not to do it, I'm going to wear it. And it turned out they were right. Are they going to get reward in Shemayim? I'm not so convinced. I'm not convinced that they would. I have a question. If Rabbi Yosef Paskin that it's not Techeles, then don't we say that the reality of halacha is determined by the Bezin Shalmata? However, the Bezin Shalmata paskins downstairs, then it's not Techeles, but it is. Well, and saying the Torah doesn't depend on what they say upstairs. It depends on what the halachic process downstairs. If the Gedolim in general say not to do it, I'm not saying if your Rebbe says to do it. A regular Yid, he doesn't know what to do. He goes into the Sfarim store, they're selling it. Should I do it? I don't understand. If the Gedolim say not to do it, and you do it, why would you walk around with a banner basically saying, I don't listen to Gedolei Yisrael? Again, if your Rebbe says to do it, you can do it. Of course you should follow him. But in general, I don't understand. What do you think God wants you to do? You don't know what to do. To take it upon yourself to say, I know better than Gedolei Yisrael. The purpose of tzitzis is to offer protection. What do you think offers more protection? To go out on a limb and be a revolutionary and say, look, the scientists think they found it, or to listen to the Gedolei Yisrael. And I found Rav Sternbuch says that somebody who puts on Techeles, you know what he's like? I have a question. Let's say someone is machmir like Beis Shammai. What does the Gemara say? Loi asa klum. Loi asa klum. What do you mean? It's a shita. Be it as it may, this is my humble opinion that everybody should follow their personal Mara Derech, but I think in general, the Gedolei Yisrael have been pretty unanimous about this issue, and therefore, I think it is more correct, Sheva al Tasa Adif, and as Rav Yonasan Eibishit says, we await the Goyal Tzedek, and in the meantime, we are Misaneach, and we thank with great gratitude Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, who this was his discovery, but ultimately he dismissed it, and we hope for Eliyahu Hanavi to be megala to us the mitzvah b'shleimusa. Shkoyach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.